why are we seeing these skyrocketing rates of everything, in our children, these developmental challenges, autism, ADHD, speech delays, everything.
I love Western medicine. I think it can be absolutely life-changing and life-saving in some situations, but I do think we are over-medicating. It was, for me, I think the straw that broke the camel's back was a live vaccination that they received, which was the varicella vaccine. It's for chickenpox prevention. You can close that wall, or you can control what's going into your child's body, and it's not going to be something toxic that crosses the blood-brain barrier. You'll see kids start talking within 6 months of a diet change. You'll see them sleeping through the night within 4 months of a diet change. It's really life-changing for both the child and the parent.
Welcome to the Uncover Your Eyes podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Meenal Agarwal. If you haven't already hit the follow or subscribe button, please do so. Let us know you're listening. It helps us bring you better episodes weekly. Today's episode will change the way that you think about childhood forever. Over the last 20 years, rates of autism, ADHD, and speech delays have skyrocketed. Almost a 300% increase since the 2000s. But what if we're not just seeing a diagnostic trend? What if we're witnessing a developmental crisis? I'm joined by Chelsea Juels, a nationally recognized school psychologist turned holistic practitioner who sees what happens when children's diets, environments, and daily routines work against their neurology. Let's dig into root causes, not just behaviors. Thank you so much, Chelsea, for being on. I really appreciate your time and everything you do.
Well, thank you. You know what? Sometimes we don't get thanked enough. And when I hear it, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so nice to hear sometimes.
Absolutely. And, I'm going to come out with the biggest question, which is, why are we seeing these skyrocketing rates of everything, in our children, these developmental challenges, autism, ADHD, speech delays, everything. I want to say we're labeling it a little more now than we probably did in my time, but why are they skyrocketing? What's happening?
Well, how controversial are we allowed to get on this podcast?
Very, as controversial as you need to help others.
I really, really think I love Western medicine. I think it can be absolutely life-changing and life-saving in some situations, but I do think we are over-medicating. I will say, just based on personal experience, and then now that I've worked with hundreds of autism families, one of the common denominators is typically vaccinations, early on vaccinations that kids are getting. The list has gone from 30 vaccines in the first year to 2 years of life to now it's like at 96. And so these kids don't even have fully developed detoxification organs at that point, and we're injecting them with whatever they've changed the ingredients to be. They're not even the same ingredients. I will also say antibiotic overuse is a huge issue with mothers. They are giving mothers a ton of antibiotics during pregnancy. I was a victim of that as well. I followed whatever my doctor told me to do. And I hear that time and time again with a lot of other families that, I had a UTI or I had a kidney infection while pregnant, because your body changes so much while you're pregnant. And that was something that we are just given, not being told that antibiotics completely rip out any good gut bacteria, and it really impacts, gosh, I could keep talking and talking, but the gut impacts our neurotransmitters so much. 70% to 90% of neurotransmitters are made inside of the gut, and when you are basically giving your child these antibiotics and yourself these antibiotics, you're setting them up for failure. And I think that is a huge contributing factor.
Wow. Okay. Chelsea, I was given an antibiotic for a UTI, exactly what you said, and I don't think I ever thought about it. I mean, I think it was a no-brainer to me because, from the
Same.
medical standpoint, I'm like, "Well, if you don't give me the antibiotic, I'm gonna get, like, a kidney infection and it's gonna spread."
Exactly.
So, for me, it was a no-brainer, but I don't know if I understood this concept. So, it's crossing the placenta and, harming the baby, and we've seen a lot of, antibiotics are not recommended generally in pregnancy unless, for this condition. So, are we seeing that those moms that were given these antibiotics have a higher rate of seeing these disorders in their children?
Yes, that is what so here's the thing, I don't have a research lab where I am monitoring these mothers, but I feel like I can conduct my own data at this point with how many moms I have met with. And yes, that is oftentimes a contributing factor to did you take antibiotics while pregnant? Yes. Do you have an autistic child? Also, yes.
Talk to me about, sometimes with genetics, we have no control over it, or limited control over, what we pass on. What about those that are developing these conditions and you're noticing it more later on in life? Like, are there environmental factors that are affecting children as well right now?
Absolutely. The new research is actually showing that autism is 90 to 99% environmental, not genetic. So there is only really a 10% genetic factor to autism. And typically that is if you or your spouse carry, the MTHFR gene or have trouble detoxing in some aspect. And so for a lot of the environmental impacts, what I'm seeing, as mentioned, the overuse of antibiotics, the vaccinations, mold is a really, really swept under the rug uh, big monster, I think, that comes and really causes neuroinflammation with kids. Um, there was something else. Oh, microplastics. I actually had a doctor that we interviewed that is really concerned about microplastics and then also just what's in our food. You're buying organic, but is it really organic? No, it's really not unless you're growing it in your backyard and you know exactly what is being sprayed or exactly what kind of soil is being used. And I do think that we have kind of spared our children's lives at the sake of convenience in a way.
Wow. You have a story, Chelsea. I want to say that something similar happened in your life, your kids. Are you able to share that?
Yeah, absolutely. I love sharing my story. It is a story I see time and time again. I feel like when I share my story, I have other parents finally feel heard or seen. But I have identical twin boys. They are 5 years old now. And when I was pregnant with them, I seemingly had very little complications. Typically identical twins, there's a lot of doctor's appointments involved. There's high risk pregnancy that comes with that. I didn't really feel like I had anything that was going wrong. I did have an early on UTI, which my doctor missed. And so it turned into a kidney infection. So I did go to her and I said, I have a UTI. Every woman knows when they have a UTI, right? And so I said, this is a UTI, please recheck. So she rechecked. She said, you're right. But by that point, I was in level 10 pain. So I ended up in the hospital. And from that point on, she said, you need to be on an antibiotic for the rest of your pregnancy. And so I think, that was step one, setting my boys up for failure, with their neurodevelopment coming into the world. But it's always a cup that overflows, right? So that was the first pour of water into their cup of toxicity. Poor gut bacteria, a gut that is not prepared for the world that they were about to enter into. So then my boys, ended up, they did a 10-day NICU stay. They were early. They were born at 34 weeks. So they were born early via C-section, which is a whole nother topic. Kids who are born via C-section get zero beneficial bacteria. Typically, if you come through the vaginal wall, you get all sorts of good gut bacteria. So they didn't get any of that. They went straight to the NICU. And then when we got home, they went straight onto the typical CDC vaccination schedule, which looking back at it, and if I kick myself now because I'm like, they were born 6 weeks early. Why are they being put on this schedule as if they were born full term? That's something I had concerns about after the fact. And when you're in the hospital, these doctors are like, well, if you don't do this, I will never forget. I had a NICU doctor who was wonderful, but said to me, I would hate for your kids to end up back in the hospital with a preventable disease because you chose not to vaccinate.
Yeah.
And these are my kids that are they were born 6 weeks early. I have twins. I am juggling, being a new mom and going to the NICU back and forth for the first 2 weeks of their life. So I kind of did whatever the professionals told me to do. And I will say my boys were developing completely typically up until 13 months. And that it was for me, I think the straw that broke the camel's back was a live vaccination that they received, which was the varicella vaccine. It's for chickenpox prevention. So after that vaccine, it was just downhill. My boys were saying hi and bye. At 13 months, kids don't do all that much, but they're starting to point and wave and say little words and babble. And it changed. It was like they were doing so well. They were talking little words. They were interactive with me to just, spinning themselves in circles, shaking their head constantly, opening and closing doors. Just in toe walking in their own world. It's just like their body completely was under attack. And they weren't the same. They weren't the same after that.
And would you and you equate that very much to, I mean, the combination of everything, but this vaccine?
I do. It is a combination of everything. I will never say like it was only the vaccine. It was when I look back at things, it was the whole, the antibiotics, the the early delivery, the C-section, it all compiles. It's a toxic overload that ends up causing, holes in their intestinal wall. It damages their and inflames their immune system so that they can't handle things, which causes in turn neuroinflammation. So I do feel like that vaccine absolutely, and I think most mothers would agree with me who have vaccine injured kids, it's always that one last shot or that one last round of antibiotics that typically tip kids into autism.
Wow. Can you talk to me a little bit about, I see a lot of work you are doing with families and children with, for example, nonverbal kids. How are you, like, what are the steps involved that you are able to help them such that, I see some of them now saying they are verbal, what steps and what are the things you are looking at and changing in their lives?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's many different areas to this. It's like I mentioned, the toxic overload. And so if you have a child that is eating quote unquote healthy and the parents live a quote unquote healthy lifestyle, and then you really do a deep dive into what their version of healthy is versus a version of healing the gut, it's completely different. So I will look at their lifestyle as a whole. Are they using Tide detergent or are they using, a detergent that has perfumes that are super inflammatory and then their kids are sleeping in these sheets that they're washing in Tide that have dyes and perfumes that are super hormone disruptors, and can cause even further issues with the gut and the overall detoxification of their body. The skin is the largest organ, and so if they're sleeping in these sheets that have perfumes and all sorts of dyes and chemicals, that is something I have them remove instantly. And oftentimes you will see families that their eczema completely goes away, or their kids used to complain of headaches and they no longer have headaches anymore. But it also, to me, the most important thing is looking at their diet. So it's how much gluten is your child getting? How much dairy are they eating a day? Are they eating, the cleaner snacks? Is that, I don't know if you guys have this in Canada, but in the States, we are like kings and queens of cleaner snacks. And it's become kind of an issue where people are like, well, I send my child to school with, these clean crackers. I'm like, but it's still a cracker. And if you're trying to heal the gut, that's a step you need to take in healing the gut and removing those. So it's really looking at what their child is eating, but it goes even further. It goes into what behavioral characteristics is your child displaying. So I will see a lot of families who their kids have OCD like behaviors,
Mhm.
super hyperactive. They can't focus. They can't even sit to sustain attention when it comes to their speech lesson. And oftentimes, I would say 9 out of 10 times, this is a glutamate issue or a yeast overgrowth issue. And so, yeast overgrowth is a huge issue medically with kids on the spectrum. It's essentially the poor gut bacteria is overgrown higher than the good gut bacteria is. And so it essentially is what I mentioned earlier, goes through that leaky gut wall, goes into their bloodstream, and then crosses the blood brain barrier and attaches to brain cells and neurotransmitters. And then it blocks the conversion of folate. So it's a whole scientific. It's hilarious because I was always awful at science, but this is so fascinating to me that I love it so much. And then if you really understand the science behind that, it really makes a lot of sense. And so if you can close that wall, or you can control what's going into your child's body, and it's not going to be something toxic that crosses the blood brain barrier, you'll see kids start talking within 6 months of a diet change. You'll see them sleeping through the night within 4 months of a diet change. It's really life changing for both the child and the parent.
I want to touch on glutamate. Did you say, can you talk about, is it a deficiency or what's happening with that? And where are we, how do we know what foods have it?
Yes. So glutamate is our excitatory neurotransmitter. So it basically an overabundance of glutamate is an issue with kids on the spectrum because their bodies can't break it down. So we all have glutamate and we all need glutamate. But if you have an overabundance of that and you have a child that's on the spectrum that typically can't break it down appropriately, it becomes a big issue. And so there are foods that are, for example, high in glutamate that will trigger like the OCD behaviors that I mentioned, hyperactivity. Stimming is a huge one because, again, it's that excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain. And so, foods that are high in glutamate are typically processed foods. It's always foods that are in a bag. It's also processed meats are really high in glutamates. And then there's some natural foods that can be high in glutamate. And if you're not paying attention to what you're serving your child, and then you're giving something that's supposedly really great like sauerkraut, that can actually make it worse. So it's really, I guess this is the benefit to working with someone, who actually understands this, is like if you're feeding your child seemingly really healthy foods and then you try and give them a live strain of a probiotic like a sauerkraut and it makes them worse, this is probably the reason behind it, is their glutamate levels are too high and it can't break that down.
Chelsea, can we test for these? Like you said, the yeast overgrowth and the glutamate levels, these are two of the, culprits. Is there a test for this?
There absolutely are tests for kids on the spectrum. You cannot ask your pediatrician typically to do these tests. You would have to go to a functional practitioner who can administer these tests, but you can ask for an organic acid test that will show you a lot of your child's yeast levels. It shows you what bacteria is missing. You can do stool testing. You can do one of my favorites is the MaxGen Labs test. It's called the Works. And it will show you what your child is sensitive to food wise. It will show you if they have the MTHFR gene. It will show you genetically what's going on at a more holistic level and inside their body. Because typically, kids will, if they do testing for folate, for example, like with cerebral folate deficiency, they will show no, everything's fine. But if you do a more holistic style of testing with a functional doctor, it will show you that for example, that folate, the fluid is actually getting caught in a different area that they don't even test for with Western medicine. So, yeah.
Wow, I want to get to that in a second, the folate deficiency. But what other foods are neuroinflammatory? I know a lot of the processed foods, the ones that comes in a bag, the candies, the all of that. But what are some of the ones that parents actually don't realize maybe that you were like, "Wow, how did you guys not know that?"
Yeah, I have two answers for this question because on one side of things, there are foods that are so marketed for health, right? It will say like only 3 ingredients, and the ingredients are citric acid, natural flavors, and avocado. So, okay, yes, that's only 3 ingredients, but natural flavors I have a big issue with because they're not natural. They
Okay.
are
Yeah.
typically chemically induced or made flavorings. And so this is one of the most inflammatory ingredients that you can find, and you think that you're serving your child like a cup of avocado and that's healthy fats and great glutathione boosters, but if it has natural flavors and citric acid is derived from black mold, which is marketed as just a vitamin C. And so I really have an issue with the way that it's marketed because we just don't know what is even in that, and it is a gut irritant for a lot of kids. On the other side of things, for kids with autism or gut issues, or kids that have an overgrowth of yeast, there's foods that are going to feed that yeast that parents think are super healthy, like potatoes or rice. And so these are foods that should be limited and not served when you're trying to get rid of that yeast, but it seems like it's healthy.
Okay, I'm gonna name 2 foods that I know you're gonna say are really bad, and I have a feeling I've seen you or somebody else post about them, but they're so popular, and I know my kids love them, so the goldfish crackers and the Made Good stuff, the Made Good granola bars and stuff. Bad, I'm assuming, 'cause um, can we talk about those? Those are super popular foods, and I know for a fact that you're gonna say no, and I wanna know roughly why.
Okay, the goldfish crackers, I was right there with you. I was the mom before my twins went through their transformation and I changed their diet and cleaned up their gut health. I would buy like the Costco size goldfish box. Like I love goldfish. Like it's delicious. I totally understand why kids love it. There's many issues with goldfish. So goldfish is made with enriched wheat flour, which is typically going to be sprayed with heavy glyphosate levels, which is, if you're not familiar with, if anyone who's listening not familiar with glyphosate, it's basically what they are spraying on our crops. So it is being sprayed on our crops that are used for the goldfish. In addition, goldfish is made with the synthetic version of folate, which is the folic acid, which is made in a lab. So it is bioengineered food. It's basically nothing of nutritional value. So it just depends. Like in moderation, if your child's at a party and they have a bag of goldfish crackers, I'm not going to be
Okay.
one to like freak out or anything. But it's not something I would buy every single day. There's lots of good swaps, like Simple Mills, if you guys have that, is a great option. They make cheddar crackers and cheddar pops, and even Annie's I would opt for, even though the ingredients are not as amazing. They're going to be better than goldfish. I think goldfish even puts yellow dye
Oh,
in
okay.
their
Yeah.
goldfish. I would have to double check on that, but I think that they do. And then the Made Good granola bites. Oh my gosh, this is something that I see parents going for all the time that is marketed so well, right? It's called Made Good. So it's the marketing on it is so good. If we're getting into the nitty-gritty of like inflammatory foods, so it does have added sugar, which is okay, right, in moderation. But if you have a child that is sensitive to sugar, like if you have an autistic child, that's not something I would be grabbing for. For my neurotypical child, it wouldn't concern me as much. but it also is not made with organic oats. I'm assuming I would have to double check the ingredients, but I do not believe that it's made with organic oats, which again are going to be super high in glyphosate levels. And at the end of the day, it's still a processed, made in a warehouse snack. So it's something that's not organic, has inflammatory oils, has added sugar. And so as a snack here or there, I'm not too concerned, but I see a lot of families going for this as like a really great healthy breakfast option, and that's where I would steer them away.
Right, right. Yeah. What are the other environmental factors? So food is, I want to say primary, what else is there that we should be steering clear of?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned this already, but detergent, like what you're
Okay.
washing
So that's
your
a big deal, Chelsea. Like, is it really like I don't know if my parents ever like I think we always used Tide when we were little. I mean, that's all we had, Tide or Bounce back in the day. So why is that such a problem now? And is it really that big of a deal?
So, the perfumes that they put in there and the fragrance. So, if you look at the ingredients, fragrance, and it's usually perfume, is what they will label it, is a huge hormone disruptor. And so, it can be super, super toxic. You will see people even talking about like candles having scents and then burning them and having your house fill. It's like one of the most toxic uh, components
Wow.
to these households, right? Is the perfume, amongst other things inside of detergent, all the chemicals that are in there. But I would also say, like if you're using Dawn dish soap, get rid of that. That also has perfume. It's not that it's just one thing. Think about it, the compilation of it. It's like the laundry detergent, the dish soap, the dishwasher pods, all of these have perfumes in them. Then you're running a candle. Then maybe you have a Glade plug-in. Then you have a Febreze because your dog is sitting on the couch and you want to spray and make it smell better. Then your child accidentally pees on the floor because you have a toddler and you need to spray that with some floor cleaner. It's like all of these things compile and then eventually can cause a lot of long-term illness. So not even talking about autistic kids, but you know, absolutely get rid of those if you have a child with autism. But if you just have a child and you're noticing that they have allergies all the time, or you're noticing they have really bad eczema, or you're noticing they have insane outbursts of behavior, and you're like, this is so unlike my child, I would 100% start with getting rid of any of those fragrances that you have in the home, any chemicals, harsh chemicals that you have in the home, and then work your way into the kitchen and see what you can start implementing as far as whole foods go.
So let's backtrack a bit to the cerebral folate deficiency. Can you explain that, and is there a test for it?
Yes. So the cerebral folate deficiency, it's a condition where there's not enough folate created and getting into the brain, which is vitamin B9. And you will often hear a lot of kids who are on the spectrum, they lack B vitamins. That's why they will even do B12 shots for kids on the spectrum because that promotes speech. And
Mm.
so folate is essential also for DNA repair, neurotransmitter reproduction, and then methylation. So, a big reason why kids on the spectrum struggle so much is they don't methylate as much as a typical person would, whether that is from damage they received from a vaccine or damage from antibiotics or whatever, wherever that damage was caused. So because the folate is so necessary for a child's brain, it's crucial for brain development, for regulating mood, for communicating effectively. And so if it can't cross the blood-brain barrier properly, it's going to basically cause havoc on a child's body. So it's so crucial. It's so important. This is why leucovorin is a huge topic, a hot topic in the autism world from the Trump administration in the states. That's why they're trying to get that uh, knowledge out. That if your child has low folate levels, this can help convert the folate, the bioavailable folate. And that's also an issue. Like if you test for folate with your typical pediatrician and they say, no, folate looks great. That is the issue, is it is severely depleted in autistic kids, but they aren't testing for it effectively. And I'm not sure exactly what test. I wish I could give you like the exact test. A lot of families will do what's called the frat test. But some of the frat tests will come back as either negative or positive for having the folate antibody. And some kids thrive with leucovorin who test positive or negative. And so it's really the really unfortunate part about having a child on the spectrum is you could test and test and test,
Yeah.
and at the end of the day, you still have to do your own experiment with your child, honestly.
Yeah, so what does a detox look like then? I mean, when you are, I want to call it a detox, but when you are working with a family with a child on the spectrum and you are going through essentially a detox, like what does that start with? Does that start with, I mean, I'm assuming changing the laundry detergent and trying that for like how long? And then trying foods, or is everything happening at once? And what does it look like? What are those steps?
Yeah, it all happens at once. So when I work with moms on their child's lifestyle, basically I take them through a three-step process. And so in my first step of detoxing is such a buzzword and I kind of hate it for kids, but essentially that is what we're doing, is opening their detox pathways, detoxing their organs. So I walk them through a three-step framework where in step one, that's what we're doing. We are ditching any household harsh chemicals that are within the home that are going to impact methylation, meaning their ability to detox. We are going to start incorporating detox baths, which a lot of families will do just with Epsom salt, baking soda, and bentonite clay is optional as well. You can do some Aztec clay. It helps to pull out heavy metals. But the reason you're doing this is for, again, the skin is the largest organ. When your child's in a bath, it's helping to open those detox pathways. It's also getting that magnesium into their body, which is going to aid in the detoxification. And so during this time with food wise, so not necessarily environment and what we're doing, getting outside, taking the baths, dry brushing if you want to do that, taking your kids on walks, making sure they see the sunlight in the morning, like basic things like that for lifestyle changes. But we are also incorporating foods that are going to boost brain development. So I, for kids on the spectrum, will include fiber and fats. So I will always tell parents to start including things like flax meal or chia seeds into their child's diet, because that's a combo of a fiber and a fat. Fiber is going to help pull out those toxins. A lot of kids on the spectrum are severely constipated, and typically they're told, here, take Miralax, and that's a neurotoxin. So I am giving them something that's going to work much more effectively, typically, if you do it correctly, and it's also going to build their brain development. So we are doing that to open up detox pathways, because remember, we want, if kids are constipated, that's one of their main detox pathways, is getting that excreted. And so we are wanting to start doing that. Once their child is pooping regularly, they are able to pee regularly. Some kids on the spectrum also don't even have frequent urination because their kidneys are backed up or their liver is backed up. There's so many issues going on inside of their body. And so that's what we start doing. A lot of this has to do with rotation as well. And so I will have parents make a lot of foods that their child seemingly typically would go for, like brownies. Like I will have them making black bean brownies because black beans have a ton of fiber in them. But kids on the spectrum typically love a brownie or a cookie or something that's going to be meeting their sensory needs,
Yeah.
right? They
Yeah.
typically like the sweets and the breaded foods. Then we will move in when they are ready, and I work with them on when they're ready to do this. We move into the more serious detoxing, which we are addressing the GI tract, the liver, the kidneys. We're addressing metals in the body, and parasites are often a big issue with kids on the spectrum. And so what I do is I group specific foods that I want them to target those specific organs with, and we are giving the body a break. So when you eliminate citric acid, natural flavors, processed foods, the body is like, finally a break, especially when you have a child that can't detox effectively. So that is what we aim to do in my second stage. I do a lot of juicing. I do a lot of herbal teas with families.
Oh,
It's
wow.
all done very, very natural in a specific order, because if you go very quickly into detoxing, you risk what's called a Herx reaction, because the gut is so tied to the brain, it can cause neurological issues, basically.
Wow, that's fascinating. I love that. I want to thank you, Chelsea. You've been awesome. This is such great information for our listeners. Can you tell them where they can find you and your program that you offer?
Yeah, absolutely. I am Chelsea Juels, but I'm at the underscore holistic underscore school psych on both TikTok and Instagram. And yeah, I currently run 6 months to speech. It is my 6 month program for moms who have children with autism and know that nutrition is the next step for their progress.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, listeners and viewers, for tuning in. If you want to catch more episodes of Uncover Your Eyes, make sure to follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube. To learn more about me, follow me on Instagram at Dr. Meenal Agarwal. Until next time, keep those eyes uncovered.